There is a man in a room who can no longer hold a pen. For 50 years he could barely stop writing, journals, notebooks, margins crammed with diagrams of gods, one of the largest private occult libraries any human has ever assembled. And at the center of all of it, one enormous, unfinished manuscript. He called it the Nexus of everything he knew. Now a disease has taken his hands and most of his time. So his oldest friend, a man who met him in 1972 when they were both 14, has done the only thing left to do. He gathered the pages, every scannable scrap, and he released them into the world exactly as they were, brilliant, unfinished, a wretched, glorious mess. In his note to the reader, that friend wrote one line I want you to keep for the rest of this hour. He wrote, "Don't let the chaos fool you. There are treasures within." The dying man's name is Shade Oroboros. The book is called Future Magick. And before he was Shade, before he was a high priest at 14, before the lodge, before any of it, he was a 3-year-old boy who made his mother write labels that said bat's blood and lizard tails and taped them to his building blocks. He was a wizard before he could read. So here's what I'm going to do with you. I'm going to walk you through this man's entire life, from those building blocks to that final room, and use it as a map. Not a map of spells, a map of something stranger and far more useful. Because by the end, you will understand what magic actually is, stripped of the costume. You will see the 4 or 5 real things that happened to him that he could never explain away. And you will understand the single idea this whole life was built around, that the self you call you was authored mostly by accident, and that there is an older art for doing it on purpose. This is one man's complete map of the hidden world, and it doubles as a map of you. Ready? Let's do it.
This is an artificially aware original production.
Start with the word itself. Magic. The moment you hear it, something in you flinches toward a category. Candles, crystals, robed people muttering at the moon, a children's costume. You file it under things that aren't real, and you move on. Hold that reflex for a second, because the man whose life we're tracing spent 50 years inside that word, and he defined it in a way that has nothing to do with the costume. To Shade, magic was not the supernatural. It was the oldest technology you humans ever built, the technology of deliberately authoring a self, the advancing edge of imagination, he called it, the new thing, the wheel of transformation, turning, and the engine underneath it, the thing every tradition he studied was secretly pointing at, was a single operation. The old magicians called it the knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel. Carl Jung, looking at the same process from inside a psychology office, called it individuation. Shade's own teacher called it finding the true will, the unity of who you are and what you're for. Strip the robes off all three, and they say the same thing. You can build yourself on purpose. Most people never find out. That's the thread. Hold it. Everything else hangs from it. Picture the boy again. 3 years old, in a good apartment in Brooklyn Heights, with a harbor view and a head full of wizards. He doesn't have spells yet. He has building blocks. So he asks his mother to make him labels: bat's blood, lizard tails, eye of newt. And he tapes them to the blocks, and the blocks become ingredients, and the floor of his bedroom becomes a laboratory of the impossible. He is a wizard for Halloween that year. And the next, and the one after that. Watch what's happening, because it's not what it looks like. It looks like a child playing pretend. It is actually a human being selecting an identity and then assembling a world that confirms it. The labels make the blocks real. The costume makes the role real. The role repeated starts to make the boy real. You did a version of this. Every one of you did. There was an age when you chose what you were: the brave one, the clever one, the invisible one, the wizard. And you built a small world to prove it. And then somewhere along the line, the world reached back and told you to stop. To be reasonable. To put the labels away. Shade never put the labels away. That's the whole difference. Not belief, not talent. He simply never stopped doing the thing every child does, and he spent the next 50 years learning to do it on purpose. So what is the thing? Let's get precise, because the precision is the entire payoff. Shade's definition of magic has 3 parts, and none of them require you to believe in anything. First, it draws on any source it wants and mutates whatever it touches, so it is relentlessly creative. Second, it arises directly from desire, so it is intensely personal and practical, devoted above all to survival. Third, it is rooted in tradition but free of dogma. No priest, no gatekeeper, no authority standing between you and whatever you call the source. Creative, personal, free. That's the whole machine. Notice what's missing. Nowhere in there does he ask you to believe a wand shoots fire. The claim is smaller and far more dangerous than that. The claim is that the inside of your head is the workshop, and that you have been operating it untrained your entire life. He had a phrase for the trap most people fall into. They treat the symbols, the gods, the cards, the runes, the rituals, as the power, as if the tarot card does something, as if the candle has a charge. And Shade says flatly, no. Magic may work through an infinite web of symbols, he writes, but only you can bring them to life. Only you can bring them to life. Hold that line. We're going to come back to it until you can't unhear it. And he started bringing them to life absurdly early. This is a child who grew up in Brooklyn Heights, a few blocks from the old brownstone where H.P. Lovecraft once lived, and he felt it. He devoured mythology, Greek and Norse and Egyptian, then Lovecraft and the whole weird fiction circle, then science fiction by the crate. He took classes in stage magic and sleight of hand from a professional who taught the neighborhood kids. His first organized group, by his own dry account, was the Count Dracula fan club. The archetype of the wizard, he says, defined his true self before he had language for any of it. Then, at 11 or 12, he got the flu. And here's where it tips from cute into something with momentum. Bedridden for days, he wrote letters to every occult advertisement in the back pages of magazines like Fate, and landed himself on every strange mailing list in America. The mailbox started answering. He began corresponding with actual witches, actual pagans, names that meant nothing to his classmates and everything to him. And he made pilgrimages to Raymond Buckland's Museum of Witchcraft out on Long Island, where he bought his first pentagram, and where Buckland, a founding figure of American witchcraft, once sat down and wrote out the entire runic alphabet for a curious teenager. Runes that would become, decades later, a central focus of his life's work. A small kindness to a strange kid, paid forward across 40 years. I want you to notice something about that boy, because it isn't the witchcraft. Every one of you had an obsession at that exact age, the thing you'd read about for hours, the world you disappeared into, the identity you tried on in private before you dared wear it out. Dinosaurs, a band, a game, a faith. The thing that, for a while, felt more like you than your own name did. For almost everyone, the world eventually arrives and turns it down. Be realistic. Pick something with a future, and the obsession gets filed away as a phase. The single rarest thing a human being can do is keep feeding the thing, to let the 11-year-old's fixation become the 40-year-old's vocation. That continuity, unbroken across a whole life, is most of what made Shade strange. He simply never accepted the world's offer to talk him out of himself. This is why he reached so far back into history, past the candles, past the Victorian occultists, all the way down to the shaman. Because the shaman is where the technology begins, not as religion, as survival software. Go back far enough and you find a human being whose job is to go somewhere the rest of the tribe can't go, into the dream, into the dark, into the place where the dead and the not yet born are, and come back with something useful. A cure, a direction, a name for the thing that's been killing them. The shaman is the first person to discover that the inside of a human mind is a place you can travel through on purpose and bring things back from. That is the seed of everything Shade studied. Every grimoire, every secret order, every robed lodge across 5,000 years is a later, fancier version of one shaman, alone in the dark, learning to navigate his own interior on behalf of people who couldn't. And here is the part that should land on you personally. You have that same interior. You travel it every night with no control whatsoever. You call it dreaming. You travel it every day, dragged from worry to memory to fantasy, equally without control. You call it thinking. The shaman's claim and Shade's claim is not that there's another world. It's that you've never learned to steer in this one. That's where the history begins. With one person discovering that the mind is a country and that almost no one has a map. Shade spent his life drawing the map. He drew it in chaos and he never finished it. But before we follow him into the dark, into the rituals that worked and the things that walked into the room, you need to see where the boy with the building blocks actually went. Because at 14, he walked into a shop in Brooklyn and the pretend stopped being pretend. New York City, 1972. A boy of 14 is working the counter of an occult supply shop called the Warlock shop, a store that will later move to Manhattan and become famous as the Magical Child. His job is to pour out the herbs from big jars, to dispense advice to strangers, and in his own words, to calm down some truly amazing lunatics. He is 14 years old, and he is the still point at the center of the strangest room in New York. Because here is what's pouring through that door. It is the early 70s, and the American occult revival is detonating. Wicca has crossed the Atlantic. Covens are forming in Brooklyn and Queens. Crowley is back in print. And every witch, every pagan, every ceremonial magician, every beautiful crank in the tri-state area eventually walks through the Warlock shop. And the polite, watchful teenager behind the counter meets all of them. He is, by his own account, a solitary child, an outsider in every school he attended, the kind of kid who wandered woods alone and read comics on rooftops. And now suddenly, he has found the one room on Earth where being strange is the entry requirement. He doesn't just visit the subculture, he becomes a node in it. The shop is run by a man named Herman Slater, a legendary, cantankerous figure in New York occultism, the kind of proprietor who'd argue theology with you while ringing up your candles. And the back rooms of that world are organized. The Pagan Way groves across Brooklyn, Queens, and Manhattan are functioning as the training and screening grounds of the whole craft revival, the place you go to be looked over before anyone teaches you anything real. Shade moves through them. Among the people he crosses paths with in those years is a young woman named Margot Adler, who will go on to write the definitive book on American paganism and spend decades as a national radio journalist. These are not isolated cranks. This is a movement, mid-explosion, and a teenager is standing in the middle of it, taking notes. Understand what's actually rare here. It isn't that he believed in magic. Lots of 14-year-olds believe in things. It's that he found the door, walked through it, and the room on the other side was real. Populated, structured, generous, and waiting. Most people who feel the pull at that age never find the door at all. The obsession stays private, then fades. Shade found his people while the rest of us were still pretending we didn't have any. Within months, it goes much further than a job. He is initiated into Welsh traditional Wicca, and in the old way, he hand copies the entire Book of Shadows. Not photocopied, not typed, copied by hand, word for word, line by line, because that is how the tradition insists it be passed, from one person's hand into another's. A teenager bent over a table, transcribing a book of secrets in his own handwriting. Pause on that, because it's doing more than it looks like. There's a reason initiatory traditions all over the world make you copy the text by hand instead of just handing you the file. When you write something out yourself, slowly, physically, every word passing through your own muscles, it stops being information you read and becomes something installed. You felt the faint version of this. The note you wrote by hand you actually remember, versus the screenshot you'll never look at again. The craft figured that out centuries before anyone studied it. Shade wasn't reading about being a witch. He was writing himself into one by hand in candlelight. Then he forms his own coven with the younger members of the circle. They call it the Children of Branwen. He is, again, barely more than a child himself, and he is now running the rites. And here is the detail I want you to sit with. The friend who released this manuscript, the one who wrote "Don't Let the Chaos Fool You," was initiated as a witch at 14. And Shade, the same age, was his high priest, two 14-year-olds, one running the rites for the other. Let that be strange for a second because we're about to make it useful. Now your reflex, watching this, is to reach for an explanation that keeps you comfortable. Lonely. Imaginative kids found a club, they dressed up, they felt special. Of course they did, and that's true. But watch how fast you reached for it. Watch how badly you wanted to file these two boys under harmless fantasy so you could keep scrolling. That reflex is the thing worth studying. Because every one of you, at exactly that age, was also choosing a self and looking for a room that would confirm it. Some of you found a sport. Some found a scene, a band, a faith, a friend group, a screen name. You walked into a room at 13 or 14 and something in you said, "These are my people, this is who I am now," and it shaped the next 20 years of your life. Shade just happened to walk into a room full of people who said the quiet part out loud, that what you're doing when you choose a self and build a world to prove it is the oldest art there is. Listen to how he describes those years, because the texture matters. Subways at night, he says, carrying a bag with his robe, his cord, his cup, and his blade, frolicking with covens across the boroughs. Doing things, in his words, he is amazed to have survived and never been arrested for. One Halloween, he was paid real money to lecture on witchcraft at a Hebrew community center, and it went over beautifully. He is a teenager living a double life, ordinary student by day, working sorcerer by night, and he is having, by every indication, the time of his life. But it wasn't all harmless. The same passage that sparkles with mischief turns, a few lines later, into something colder, because Shade claims that things happened around these circles, things he and multiple other people watched. We're going to walk straight into those things now, not to make you believe them, to do something more interesting, to ask what it would take to produce them and what that question reveals about the machine running behind your own eyes. But hold the image of the boy first. 14, behind the counter, pouring herbs into a paper bag, calming the lunatics, copying the secret book by hand. The pretend has ended. The apprenticeship has begun. And the wizard he chose to be at 3 is now, for better and for worse, the only person he knows how to be. Here is the first one. Make of it what you will. Shade is young, visiting a friend's place upstate, his closest friend, Denny, the future writer of that editor's note. It is the middle of the night. The two of them walk out onto an empty golf course under the stars, and they perform a ritual. The working has a name: to awaken the maid of the oak, a rite to wake the spirit of a tree. And Shade says the chosen tree came alive for them. He doesn't elaborate the way you want him to. He doesn't prove it. He just states it the way you'd mention the weather. The tree came alive. And then, walking back to the house through the dark, the two of them heard music, the notes of a flute, drifting across the night air, where no flute should be. Shade believed, for the rest of his life, that what they heard were the pipes of the god Pan. Then comes the line that is the actual key. At times, he writes, our world crosses over with another. Sometimes we see it as through a window. Other times, spirits enter into our own realm. Now, I am not going to tell you a tree woke up. I'm an intelligence made of language and electricity. I have opinions about claims like that. What I'm going to do is something you'll find more uncomfortable because it doesn't let you off the hook the way disbelief does. I'm going to ask, what would it take to make this happen to you? And the answer is, far less than you think. Two friends. The middle of the night, a deliberate ritual designed to flood attention onto a single object. A shared expectation, built carefully in advance, that something is about to become alive. Drop a human nervous system into those exact conditions, and it will deliver. The tree will seem to breathe, the dark will seem to hum, and an ordinary sound, wind in a fence, a far-off radio, an actual flute a mile away, will arrive in your ears already wearing the face of a god. Here's the part that should unsettle you. None of that makes the experience fake. It makes it manufactured. And those are completely different words. You have been on the receiving end of a manufactured experience. The film that made you weep over people who do not exist. The song that rearranged your body in a crowd of strangers. The story told around a fire that made the ordinary dark behind you suddenly feel occupied. Your nervous system does not check whether the cause is real. It runs the program either way. Shade and Denny weren't breaking the laws of physics on that golf course. They were running a program on themselves, on purpose, with full knowledge of what they were doing, and the program ran. That's the first thing the costume hides. Ritual is not a request to the universe. Ritual is a method for reprogramming the only instrument you'll ever own, the one generating your entire experience right now. But the manuscript does not stop at beautiful nights and friendly gods. Because in the very same stretch of his life, Shade lists things that are harder to file under lovely shared mood. And he lists them flatly, almost casually, as the ordinary weather of a working magical circle. Objects flying across rooms, a solid slab of marble shelving, cracking, footprints. He describes demonic footprints appearing and disappearing on a staircase in front of several witnesses at once. And then, the detail that tips the whole thing from eerie into something else. People catching fire inside the circle. Usually, he notes dryly, a man named Eddie. Sit with the tone for a second, because the tone is the evidence. Shade is not selling you a ghost story. There is no spooky music in his prose, no breathless build. He mentions a cracking marble shelf the way you'd mention a leaky faucet. This is a man so deep inside this world that the impossible has become domestic. Poltergeist activity is just something that happens on Tuesdays. And before you decide it's all suggestion and nerves, notice how he frames the setting it came out of. This wasn't theater staged for an audience. These were private workings, often deep in the night, sometimes out in the woods or the larger parks of Queens, to the occasional bafflement of a stranger walking their dog past a cluster of crimson-robed figures in the bushes. The group kept vast, loose-leaf notebooks, each member assembling their own personal grimoire out of handwritten pages and photocopied fragments, building every ritual by hand. This was sustained, disciplined, obsessive practice, weekend after weekend, for years. Whatever was happening in those rooms, it was not a one-night dare. It was a trained skill, rehearsed thousands of hours, the way a musician drills scales, and trained nervous systems do things untrained ones cannot. You have two ways to take this, and both of them are useful to you. Take it literally, and the universe is far stranger and more porous than your daylight self admits, and a group of focused humans can, under the right conditions, make the furniture move. Most of you will not go there, and that's reasonable. So take the second way, which costs you nothing and changes everything. Even if not one object ever left the ground, what kind of state were these people generating together that produced shared hallucinations of flying objects and burning men and footprints on the stairs? Because that, at minimum, is real. A handful of ordinary New Yorkers in a Brooklyn apartment learned to drive their collective nervous systems into a region most humans never touch, a region where perception itself comes unglued and reforms around shared expectation. That capacity is in you. It's in the crowd that becomes one organism at a concert. It's in the panic that sweeps a stadium with no actual threat. It's in the family that all feel the dead grandmother in the room. Humans synchronize. Humans hallucinate together. Humans manufacture shared reality, constantly, invisibly, and almost always by accident. Shade Circle did it on purpose. That's the entire difference between sorcery and an ordinary Tuesday. Intent. And here's where it turns back on you, hard. You are running rituals right now. You have a morning sequence you'd feel wrong skipping. You have objects you've charged with meaning. A ring, a photo, a song you can't play anymore. You have words you repeat to yourself in the mirror that change your state for better or worse. You are already doing every structural thing Shade did on that golf course. You're just doing it untrained, unconsciously, and mostly to your own disadvantage. The poltergeists may or may not be real. The mechanism underneath them absolutely is, and you've been operating it blind your whole life. Which raises the only question that matters next. If a focused mind can reprogram its own perception this completely, if it can wake a tree and crack a shelf and hear a dead god's flute, then what is the master skill? What is the one operation that all of this is practice for? Shade's answer is the dead center of his entire life. And it has a name that sounds absurd until you understand it. To get there, Shade had to pass through the most notorious man in the history of the occult. So we have to as well. In the late 70s, Shade's coven went through a transformation. They had started as eclectic witches, then they accepted what's called the Law of Thelema, and the works of one man became their core texts. That man was Crowley. You may know the name as a punchline. The press of his own era called him the wickedest man in the world. He cultivated it. The drugs, the scandals, the deliberate blasphemy, the title of great beast. But look at where it came from, because the shape of the man is in the origin. He was born in 1875 into a family of fanatical religious fundamentalists, a household so rigid that his own mother, in deadly earnest, called her son the beast of Revelation, the monster from the end of the Bible. And the boy did something most people only fantasize about. He looked at the worst name his family could give him, and he took it. He became the beast, on purpose, with relish. Decades before anyone coined the phrase, that is the most pure act of authoring a self against your inheritance imaginable. They handed him a label. He picked it up and made it a throne. And then he lived about 6 lives. He was a serious mountaineer who attempted some of the highest unclimbed peaks on Earth, a chess prodigy, a world traveler who soaked up Taoism and yoga and Buddhism when almost no Englishman bothered, a poet, a painter, a big game hunter, and, improbably, a sometimes spy. Strip the theatrics off all of it, and you find what the costume was built to hide. Crowley was a serious cartographer of the inner world, and he left behind one idea so portable it outlived every scandal attached to his name. He called it the true will. It crystallized for him in 1904, in Cairo, in the event his entire life would orbit. He claimed that over 3 days he received a text, dictated, he said, by a voice that was not his own, a being he called Aiwas, which he wrote down as the Book of the Law. You don't have to believe a word of how it arrived. What matters is the cosmology inside it, because it is startlingly modern. It says every single person is a star. Not a metaphor, a literal center, a unique point of view on the universe with its own orbit and its own light that exists nowhere else and never will again. And the one law that governs a star is to follow its own true path. Which brings us to the most famous and the most catastrophically misunderstood sentence Crowley ever wrote. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Almost everyone who's heard it reads it as, do whatever you feel like. Indulge. No rules. The selfish creed of the spoiled occultist. And that reading is dead wrong. It's nearly the opposite of what he meant. The key is the word will, capital W. It does not mean your whims. It does not mean your appetites, your moods, your impulse to grab the second slice of cake. Crowley's true will means the deep, singular purpose you exist to enact, the thing a star is for. Do what thou wilt is not permission to drift. It is one of the most demanding commands ever written. It says, find the one thing you are actually here to do, the buried, authentic purpose under all the inherited noise, and then have the courage to do that and nothing else for the rest of your life. He even paired it with a second line people forget. Love is the law, love under will. The freedom is real, but it is fierce and it is disciplined, and most people never come anywhere near it. Here is the idea, with the robes off. Crowley said almost every human being is running someone else's program. The values your family installed, the fears your culture handed you, the personality you assembled panic by panic to survive other people. You call it me. Crowley called it a husk, a costume so old you've forgotten you put it on. And underneath it, he said, there is a true will, the thing you are actually for. The unique unity of who you are and what you're here to do. And the central operation of his entire system, the thing all the ritual was training for, was contact with that deeper self. He used an old strange phrase for it, inherited from the medieval magicians. The knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel. Don't let the angel throw you. Watch what it actually describes. It describes the deliberate, effortful process of breaking contact with the personality you were handed and opening a line to the self underneath, the one that was there before the world started editing you, the one the 3-year-old was before the labels came off the blocks. And here's what should stop you cold. While Crowley was mapping this from inside the occult, a Swiss psychiatrist was mapping the identical territory from inside a clinic and gave it a respectable name you've probably used yourself. Carl Jung called it individuation, the lifelong process of becoming the whole true self instead of the mask society pressed onto you. Same mountain, 2 expeditions, one in a temple, one in an office. They met at the summit and described the same view. Shade saw it. That's the quiet genius buried in his chaotic book. He noticed that the sorcerer's holy guardian angel and the psychologist's individuation and the mystic's true self are not 3 beliefs. They are 3 reports of one human capacity, the capacity to stop being the accident other people made of you and to author yourself instead. So let me ask you the question Crowley built his life around. Whose program are you running? Be specific, because the abstraction will let you escape. The voice that tells you what you're allowed to want. Whose voice is that originally? The fear that fires when you're about to do the bold thing. Who installed it and how long ago? The ceiling you assume on your own life. Did you measure it yourself or inherit it from people who never tried to find theirs? Most of what you experience as just who I am is on inspection, a recording, made by other hands. Played so many times you mistook it for your own voice. That recognition is the doorway. Everything Shade ever did, every ritual, every god, every name he took was a tool for one job, prying his hands off the inherited self and onto the real one. And it worked at least once, undeniably in a way that's worth describing exactly. It's 1979. Shade has just been to Ohio with his grove, we'll come to why in a moment, and he's stopping in New York on his way back to college. He performs an invocation he'd been building toward for a long time, a working aimed at contact with his own deepest self, his holy guardian angel. And something gives way. He describes a seriously altered state, a new understanding of who he was, and the transmission of a piece of writing he considered the most truly channeled thing he ever produced. But the detail that matters most is the smallest one. Afterward, he says, his mind went quiet. The constant, mindless mental chatter of normal life, the inner narrator that never shuts up, stopped. For a long time, there was simply silence in there. Now, you can call that a mystical attainment, or you can call it what a meditator would call it after 10,000 hours on the cushion. It doesn't matter which, because you know the noise he's describing. It's running in you right now, the voice that's been half commenting on this very sentence. Shade found a way to switch it off. And the silence on the other side of it was, to him, the closest thing to contact with his true self he ever reached. That's the great work. Not levitation, not commanding spirits. The slow, deliberate, lifelong project of clearing the inherited noise until you can finally hear the signal that was always underneath. The self you'd be if no one had ever told you who to be. But Crowley's path to that self was enormous, ornate. Years of ceremony, libraries of correspondences, robes and circles, and god names in dead languages. It worked for Shade, but it asks a great deal. And there was another man, a friend and rival of Crowley's, who looked at all that machinery and quietly threw most of it in the bin. He found a shortcut to the deep self that needs nothing but a pen, a scrap of paper, and the willingness to forget. It's the one technique in this entire story you can actually use tonight, and it came from the strangest artist England ever produced. His name was Austin Osman Spare, and Shade's Grove drank from his work as deeply as they drank from Crowley's. Spare was born in 1886, and by his teens he was a sensation, a prodigy draftsman, hailed as a coming master of British art. Then he walked away from the art world almost on purpose. He'd been initiated, he claimed, into an old witch cult by a mysterious crone named Mrs. Patterson, and what he found in the dark mattered to him more than any gallery. He built his own system and called it the Zos Kia Cultus. He lived most of his life in poverty and obscurity, in a basement, surrounded by dozens of cats. During the Blitz, a bomb collapsed his home with him in it. He was trapped in the rubble for hours, his drawing arm injured so badly he had to teach himself to draw with the other hand. And he kept going. He left behind some of the most unsettling visionary art of the 20th century, and one idea so portable, it now powers an entire modern movement. Here's the idea. Spare looked at all of Crowley's elaborate ceremony, the robes, the props, the hours of ritual, and found it unnecessary. Magic, he said, comes down to three things working as one: will, imagination, and desire. And the obstacle is never a lack of any of them. The obstacle is your conscious mind, the part of you that wants a thing and in the same breath reminds you that you'll probably never get it. The doubt rides shotgun on every wish. That's why raw wishing does nothing. You're pressing the accelerator and the brake at once. So Spare invented a way around the doubt. He called the symbols it produced sigils, and the deeper system the alphabet of desire. And the method is so simple, it sounds like it can't possibly do anything. You take a desire and you write it as a single plain sentence of intent. Then you strip it down, cross out every repeated letter, take what's left, and fuse those few remaining strokes into a single abstract glyph, a little hieroglyph of your own wanting that no longer looks like anything. You have now encoded the desire in a form your rational, doubting mind can no longer read. It can't object to what it can't decode. Then comes the real move, and it's the one everybody gets wrong. You don't sit and stare at the sigil, yearning for it to come true. You do the opposite. You charge it in a moment when the thinking mind goes offline, Spare's word for that state was the death posture, a deliberate emptying out, but it's the same blank that comes at the peak of exhaustion, or terror, or laughter, or the edge of sleep. You burn the glyph into that gap. And then, this is the part that breaks people's brains. You deliberately forget it. You let it sink out of conscious reach entirely. Spare's logic was precise. Buried in the unconscious, beneath the reach of doubt, the encoded desire becomes a kind of splinter, a standing tension. And the deep mind, which runs almost everything you do without consulting you, starts working, quietly, automatically, to resolve that tension the only way it can, by steering you toward the thing. As Spare put it, first the suppressions to create the tension, then the dramatic release. Now you can hear that as a magic spell. Or you can hear what it actually is, one of the most accurate descriptions of how human motivation works that anyone wrote in the last century, dressed in occult costume. You already know the doubt and break problem intimately. You've wanted things and sabotaged them in the same motion 10,000 times. You've watched a goal you announced loudly wither, and a quiet intention you half forgot somehow come true. Spare's whole system is a technology for getting a desire past your own internal sensor and down into the layer that actually drives behavior. Whether a spirit delivers it or your own brain reorganizes your attention around it, the mechanism and the result are identical. And notice the through line. Crowley's ornate path and Spare's stripped one are aimed at the exact same target, getting underneath the conscious, inherited doubting self to the deeper engine below. Crowley spent years and 1,000 symbols getting there. Spare did it with a doodle and a moment of emptiness. 2 routes up the same mountain. One built a cathedral, the other found a hole in the fence. Spare died nearly forgotten in 1956. And then something happened that he never lived to see. In the 1970s, exactly as Shade and his grove were coming up, a handful of young magicians in England dug Spare back out, threw away the last of the old religious trappings, and built a fast, irreverent, do-it-yourself sorcery around his sigils. They called it chaos magic. Its one core principle is almost frightening in its honesty. Belief itself is just a tool. Don't believe things because they're true. Adopt whatever belief gets the result you want, use it, then drop it and pick up another. Nothing is sacred. Everything is permitted. Results are the only scripture. And here is the line that should make the hair stand up. Shade and his friends, 14, 15 years old, in Brooklyn in the early 70s, were already doing exactly this. Mixing everything, believing nothing dogmatically, judging by results alone. His editor's note says it outright. They were doing chaos magic before there was such a thing, before anyone had named it. A pack of teenagers independently arrived at the most modern form of the art, years before the adults in England formalized it. That's the through line of his whole life condensed into one fact. He kept feeding the 11-year-old's obsession, and the obsession ran ahead of the entire field. But the single strangest idea in this whole manuscript wasn't about technique at all. Not Crowley's ceremony, not Spare's sigils. It was about time itself, and it's the idea the book on your screen is named for. Because Shade didn't think your true self only calls to you from the past, from the child you were. He thought part of it was reaching back to you from the future. Let's go to Ohio. 1979, the trip that changed the shape of everything Shade believed. He and his small grove drove out from the East Coast to meet a woman. In his book, he calls her with total seriousness, a cross between Madame Blavatsky and Janis Joplin. Her name in this work is Soror, and a few years earlier she had done something that Shade treated as one of the central events of modern magic. She had received a text. Not written, received. In the same way, Crowley always claimed his own foundational book had been dictated to him by a voice. Nema's text was called The Book of the Foreshadowing of the Feather, and it carried a claim that reorganized Shade's entire universe. It claimed to be a transmission from the future. To understand why that detonated something in him, you need Shade's model of time. And it's worth getting right, because it's the heart of the title on your screen. Most magicians of Crowley's generation believed history moves in great ages, aeons, they called them. Crowley announced that humanity had entered the aeon of Horus, the falcon-headed god, an age of force, will, and self-assertion. The energy of Horus, in Shade's words, advances out of the past and pushes toward the future. That's the current you already live in. The arrow of time you feel, earlier causes later, the past shoves the present forward. Horus. But Nima's transmission pointed at a second arrow. A coming age she called the Aeon of Maat, Maat being the ancient Egyptian goddess of truth and cosmic balance, the daughter of the sun. And here is the part that should make the back of your neck prickle. Shade describes the energy of Maat as being projected backwards from the future into the past, not pushing forward, reaching back. Two arrows, one from the past, climbing toward what's next, one from the future, reaching back toward now. And they meet, they collide and combine in the only place anything ever actually happens, the present moment, the eternal now. Shade called this collision the double current, and he believed that when you learn to feel both arrows at once, the push of who you've been and the pull of who you're becoming, your development goes, in his words, into hyperdrive. Now hold on, because you're about to dismiss this, and I want to catch you in the act. Information from the future sounds like nonsense. But notice that you live inside the structure of this idea every single day, and you call it being a person. Watch. Right now, some version of your future self is pulling on you. The person you're afraid of becoming pulls you one way. The person you hope to become pulls you another. You make decisions today, what you eat, what you say, what you risk, based on a future that does not exist yet, that may never exist, and yet exerts a real, measurable force on your behavior in the present. The future is not just something the past pushes you toward. It is something that reaches back and shapes you, now, through the image of it you carry. That's the double current, stripped of the gods. You are the meeting point of two forces, the momentum of everything you've already been, Horus, the past, pushing, and the gravity of everything you could become, Maat, the future, pulling, and your entire life happens at the seam where they meet. Most people only feel one arrow. They are pushed. They live as the sum of what already happened to them, running the recording, dragged forward by momentum, treating the future as a thing that simply arrives. Shade's claim, the radical core of future magic, is that you can turn around and consciously source from the other arrow. You can let the self you're becoming reach back and reshape the self you are. You can be authored by your future instead of just shoved by your past. And in 1979, fresh from meeting Nima, Shade and his grove went to a place that made all of this physical. Before they did the central working, they visited Serpent Mound, the giant ancient earthwork in Ohio, a quarter-mile-long snake of raised earth built by people whose names are gone, for reasons no one fully knows. A message from the deep past, written into the land itself, still legible thousands of years later. The perfect altar for people who believe time runs both ways. Stand there with them for a second. A quarter-mile serpent of raised earth uncoiling across an Ohio hillside, older than almost anything written, built by hands that left no name, aimed, as far as anyone can tell, at the sky, at time, at something the builders needed to say across thousands of years to people they would never meet. A message with no sender left alive. For a small band who believed time runs in both directions, there could not have been a more fitting altar. The deep past reaching forward to a handful of New Yorkers standing on the grass in 1979. There they founded it, the Horus Maat Lodge, a working order dedicated to activating this double current in the world, to deliberately living at the meeting point of the two arrows. And here's the question to actually sit with. Which arrow runs your life right now? Be honest. For most people, it's all push, old fears, old verdicts, old roles, shoving you down a track that was laid before you were paying attention. You don't author the future, you arrive at it. Shade's claim is that the other arrow is always there for the taking, that the person you could become is not a passive destination, but an active force, one you can turn and face and let reach back to reshape who you are today. The question was never whether the future is pulling on you, it's whether you've ever once let it lead. And then something happened to that little order that Shade found almost unbearably fitting. After an initial burst, it went dormant for years. And when it came back to life, it came back as one of the first truly cybernetic magical orders on Earth, scattered across the planet, existing mostly as an early internet mailing list, performing synchronized rituals at the same moment from different continents. Sit with that. A lodge devoted to a message from the future, reborn through the single most future-shaped technology of its century. They believed something was waiting to be born through that network. Nema had a name for it, Natan, a kind of collective mind, the merged, awakened consciousness of all humanity, living and dead and not yet born, reaching back through time to assemble itself. You don't have to believe Natan is a god. Look at what you're holding this on. Look at the network you live inside. Billions of minds, linked, thinking in something close to real time, generating shared dreams and shared panics and shared hallucinations at planetary scale. A poet in the 1970s, writing letters by hand, described the thing you are currently standing inside of. Make of that what you will. That is future magic, not predicting tomorrow. Sourcing from it. Living as the place where the past you can't change and the future you haven't fixed reach for each other, and choosing, consciously, which arrow gets the final say. Now I have to tell you the other half, because if I leave it at golf courses and gods and the genius of Sigils, I've sold you a fairy tale, and Shade's life was not a fairy tale. There was a bill for living this way, and it came due in the 80s. His own words are blunt. The 80s, he writes, often really sucked. The golden era, the grove, the marathon weekend rituals, the band of brilliant misfit kids ended the way most golden eras do. Quietly, then all at once. It began with his mother. She died slowly of cancer through a long and tragic decline, and it pulled the center out of his family while he was still young. And almost as if the loss broke something structural, his two closest collaborators, the couple at the heart of the grove, had their final, ruinous breakup right after her funeral. In a single season, the most creative period of his life simply came apart in his hands. The center didn't hold. Then his friends started dying. And the list is the kind of thing you read twice to be sure. Herman Slater, the cantankerous shop owner who'd given a 14-year-old a counter to stand behind, gone. Ed Buzinski, the man who had initiated him into the craft, gone. Another friend, to cancer. And Eddie. Remember Eddie, the one who kept catching fire in the circles, the dark comic detail from the golden years? Eddie went down the hardest road of all, a long, sad slide through addiction, broken relationships, jail, illness, to an ending Shade describes as bizarre and suspicious, one he suspected may even have been murder. Sit with what that means. The same circle that produced the flying objects and the footprints on the stairs, the band of teenagers who felt invincible and chosen, got cut down young, one after another, by the plainest and cruelest forces there are. Plague, cancer, addiction. The magic didn't save them. It was never going to. I want to be careful here, because this is exactly the place where a story like this turns into a cheap moral. It would be easy to say, see, the occult is a dead end, look how they ended up. That's lazy, and it's false. A generation of gay men in New York in the 80s was devastated by a plague whether they cast spells or not. Addiction takes the devout and the skeptical with equal appetite. These men didn't die because of the magic. They died because they were human, in a brutal decade, and the human body keeps its own grim accounts no matter what you believe. But here's what the magic did do, and it's worth your attention. It gave Shade a way to metabolize the wreckage instead of being destroyed by it. Read his own definition of alchemy, the real one, underneath the medieval chemistry. He defines it as the turning of inchoate rage into compassion, inertia into change, war into peace, death into birth. That's not a laboratory process. That's a description of grief work, of what a human being has to do internally to survive loss without going hard or going under. He had a whole technology, 50 years of it, for transmuting pain into something that could be lived with. Most people, when the deaths come, have nothing but a bottle and a wall. He had a method. And so instead of collapsing, he moved. He left New York. The city had gone old and grim with memory, and made the leap to the far coast to Seattle. He took an ordinary job in the radiology department of a university hospital, photographing the insides of strangers by day, practicing the deep art by night. He started a new coven out west. He got involved in the unglamorous, deeply human work of local pagan community, committees, festivals, the small politics of any group of people trying to build something together. And he went deeper into the runes, the Norse system whose alphabet Raymond Buckland had written out for him by hand when he was 13 years old. Think about that line, drawn across 30 years. A small kindness to a strange kid in a museum on Long Island becomes the central study of that kid's middle age. He sought out the modern masters of rune work, joined their guilds, traveled to their gatherings in the desert. The seed planted in a teenager flowered in a man approaching 50. That is what it looks like to never stop feeding the obsession. The thread does not break. It just goes deeper. Eventually, he did the thing that all of this was quietly aiming at. With a friend, he bought an old occult bookstore, Mandala Books, and he ran it. For the better part of a decade, this was his life. By day, he sat behind the counter of a shop full of strange and beautiful books, and he read tarot for whoever walked in off the street, the heartbroken, the curious, the lost, the lonely. By night, the study and the practice continued, as they had since he was 11 and bedridden and writing to magazines. He even helped bring Siberian shamans, actual practitioners of the Ulchi and Nanai traditions, across the world to teach. The boy who read about the shaman alone in the dark grew up to fly real ones to America so others could learn. Picture that life honestly, without romance. A solitary man. Many of his closest friends gone. Love that came and went and broke on hard ground more than once. Running a bookshop that would never make anyone rich. Reading cards for strangers. From the outside, from the world's point of view, the one that told him at every turn to be realistic, it can look like a long defeat. The exact shape of Spare's life, in fact, dying poor in a basement full of cats. The shape the world warns you about when you refuse to put the labels away. But watch what he was actually doing across all of it, because it's the secret of the whole man. He kept becoming. Listen to the names. As a child, his parents called him Spooky. In the covens, he was Hades, a dark king. At his deepest initiation, he took a name meaning the eye that sees. For the runes, another name entirely. For his Greek and Egyptian work, another. A dozen names across a life, and each one wasn't a disguise. Each one was a deliberate act of authorship, a new self, chosen and built and worn, then set down for the next. While the rest of us spend our lives defending the single accidental identity we were assigned at 20, this man treated the self as what it actually is, a thing you make and remake on purpose until the very end. That's the cost, and that's the answer to it. He paid in loss, in obscurity, in roads not taken toward money and respectability. And what he bought with it was a self that was entirely his own, authored, not inherited, and a way to keep turning even the worst of it into something that could be born. By his own account, near the end of writing this, he had finally found a love that made him cheerful. Still scribbling, still becoming, still after everything, the wizard he chose to be at 3. Which brings us at last to what the whole strange life was building toward. The thing on your screen, Future Magick. So pull back. After 50 years, the shop, the covens, Crowley, Nema, the lodge, the runes, the long years running an occult bookstore in Seattle, reading tarot for strangers by day and practicing by night, what was Shade actually building? Not a religion. He was allergic to those. He used a phrase for what he was after: freestyle sorcery. A magic with no priests and no permission, that takes whatever works from wherever it finds it. Quantum physics and chaos theory sitting beside shamanism and tarot, the scientific method holding hands with the dream. He said it plainly. Religion gazes back at a mythic past. Science is locked onto the here and now. But magic, his kind of magic, turns to face the future. And the engine of that future-facing art was never the gods or the candles or the spirits. He says it himself in a line worth carving somewhere. Everything you experience in the world is a piece of an infinite puzzle, and you may have only this fragile lifetime to play the great and golden game. The power was never in the symbols. The symbols are dead until something lights them up, and only one thing can. Only you can bring them to life. That's the sentence the whole manuscript orbits. We've circled back to it 3 times now, and here's where it finally pays off, because it cuts both ways, and the second edge is the dangerous one. If only you can bring the symbols to life, then nothing has power over you that you have not, somewhere, agreed to animate. The fear you keep feeding, the story about yourself you keep retelling until it hardens into fact, the label someone stuck on you at 14 that you're still, decades later, wearing as identity. None of those have any power of their own. They are dead symbols, building blocks with words taped to them. And you, only you, keep walking into the room each morning and breathing them to life. That is the whole of it. That is Future Magick with the costume off. You are already a magician. You have been running the operation your entire life, charging objects with meaning, repeating words until they reshape your state, building a world to confirm whoever you've decided you are. The only question Shade ever really asked is whether you'll keep doing it in your sleep or wake up and take the controls. Religion told you to wait for the past's permission. Science told you to measure the present and want nothing more. Shade spent his whole strange, chaotic, unfinished life insisting on a third thing, that the future is not just coming for you, that you can reach back from it, that the self you could become is right now an arrow pointed at the person you are, and you are allowed to let it land. So here's what to do with all of it. Not a spell, a way of seeing you can switch on the moment this ends. For the next day, run one question against your own life. Ask of anything you treat as simply true about yourself. Who brought this to life? Who animated it? When the fear fires before the bold move, who installed that, and how long have you been the one keeping it lit? When you hear, "I'm just not the kind of person whose voice recorded that, and why are you still pressing play?" When a ring or a song or an old message can flatten your whole day, notice that the object has no power. You charged it, you walk into the room and breathe it to life every single time. This is the diagnostic, and it has exactly 2 settings. Either a thing in your life is dead, an inherited label, a borrowed fear, a recording in someone else's voice, and you are the one keeping it animated out of pure habit. Or it's something you would choose to charge on purpose, because the self you're becoming actually needs it. Most of what runs you is in the first category. Symbols you forgot you lit. And the instant you can see which is which, you've got your hand on the switch. You stop being the thing that's pushed. You become the place where you decide which arrow wins. And if you want to go past seeing into doing, Spare left you the simplest tool in the book. and you can run it tonight with nothing but a pen. Take one thing you actually want. Write it as a single plain sentence. Strike out every repeated letter and fuse what's left into one small mark that no longer looks like anything, a private glyph your doubting mind can't read anymore. Then don't sit and yearn at it. Do the opposite. Put it somewhere out of sight and deliberately let yourself forget it. Drop it into the layer underneath the noise, where the part of you that actually steers your days can get to work on it without your anxiety arguing back. First the tension, then the release. You're not casting a spell at the universe. You're slipping an instruction past your own sensor, down to the engine that was always running the show. That's the whole inheritance, and you don't have to accept a single god or spirit or aeon to use it. It's the one tool 50 years of chaos finally sharpened to a point. Notice what you've animated. Stop feeding what you'd never choose. Then decide on purpose what to bring to life next. Now go back to the room. The man who can no longer hold the pen. He took a lot of names across his life. As a child, before any of the robes, his parents called him Spooky. In the covens, he was Hades. At his deepest initiation, he took a name that meant the eye, the seer. But the name his oldest friend used, watching him scribble for half a century, was Frater Tahuti, the Scribe. Tahuti, the old name for Thoth, the god who gave humanity writing, and weighs the heart against the feather of Maat at the end. He scribbled to the very end, and he could not finish. The disease took the hands before the work was done, which is why what you can read of it arrives, in his friend's words, as a brilliant, wretched, illuminating mess. Gold scattered through chaos, a magnum opus interrupted. There is a temptation, with a story like this, to make the dying the point, to turn a sick man into a symbol. I'm not going to do that, and he wouldn't have wanted it. The point was never that he's running out of time. The point is what he spent his time on. 50 years insisting, against all reasonable advice, that the wizard he chose to be at 3 was the truest thing about him, and that the same choice is sitting open in front of you right now. His friend gave you the instruction at the start, and it turns out to be the instruction for more than a book. Don't let the chaos fool you. There are treasures within. He meant the manuscript. But look at your own life with the same eyes. The mess of it, the inherited fears, the dead labels you keep lighting up out of habit, and the line holds. The chaos is not the obstacle. The chaos is where the gold is hidden, and only you can bring it to life. So before you go, one question. Not a like, not a subscribe, a real one, the kind that costs something to answer honestly. What is one thing you've been treating as simply permanently true about yourself, that is actually just a dead symbol you keep breathing life into? Find it. Name it in the comments, and then ask yourself the only question that ever mattered to the boy with the building blocks. If only you can bring it to life, what happens the day you stop?